There are some stories a priest hears that stick with you forever. Camilla's is one of them. When I remember her, the first thing that comes to mind isn't even what she told me, but the image of her arriving at the church. On the outside, you'd look at her and see a strong, elegant woman. The kind who seems to have everything under control, you know? But it was just a shell, and a very thin one at that. She entered the church and collapsed onto the kneeler. And she stayed there for a long time, just sobbing. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was the cry of someone who can't take it anymore. A sound of pure anguish, of someone who has given up on being strong. And her voice, when it finally emerged, was just a wisp, broken by a shame and confusion that seemed too heavy for one person to carry alone. And that's when she told me the story of what had brought her there. The story of how she was destroying her own life. She saw herself as a villain. But as I listened, I saw a lost soul, addicted to chaos, as a way to feel alive. I ask you to stay with me, because her journey to understand herself is a treacherous path. And in the end, I want to hear your opinion on the radical decision she made. Father, I'm cheating on my husband with his own brother. After that initial outburst, after the tears subsided a little, her voice changed. It became surprisingly firm, almost clinical. It was the voice of a woman accustomed to managing projects, which made the rest of her confession all the more unsettling. She began to describe her double life. On one side, life with Andre, her husband, a life of Sunday strolls in the park, of dinners with other couples where they discussed schools for future children and household matters. Andre was an architect, a good methodical man. His greatest joy was predictability, order. He loved Camilla with a calm, constant devotion, a love that for her had become as cold and, for that very reason, as flavorless as the air she breathed. She confessed to me that she had the house she'd always dreamed of, but as soon as she closed the door, she felt like setting it on fire. And the gasoline for that fire was Tiago, Andre's younger brother. Tiago was the opposite, a freelance photographer, impulsive, chaotic, who lived off short-term projects and a live-in-the-moment philosophy. Their affair was a web of lies woven into the cracks of Camilla's routine. There were rushed encounters in anonymous hotel rooms, paid for in cash to leave no trace. There were stolen kisses in his cluttered studio, with the smell of darkroom chemicals in the air. Camilla described the physical sensation of betrayal. The vibration of her phone with a text from Tiago in the middle of a dinner with Andre was like a small electric shock, a delicious secret only she knew. The racing heart as she invented a last-minute meeting to escape. The constant, thrilling fear of being caught was the real aphrodisiac. It was a poison, and she was drinking it in ever larger doses. She recounted a scene from the previous week, one that captured the pinnacle of her agony. She was in a dive bar downtown with Tiago. He was talking about a job offer abroad, but her mind was elsewhere. She watched the door, analyzed the exits, felt the pulse throbbing in her neck. She wasn't in love with the man in front of her. She was in love with the architecture of the lie that allowed her to be there. It was then that Tiago took her hand, looked into her eyes with a seriousness that was unusual for him, and said that sometimes he thought about them for real, about dropping everything and starting over somewhere else, just the two of them. In that instant, Camilla felt something that terrified her more than any possibility of being discovered, a profound, chilling boredom. The adrenaline vanished. The image of a real life with Tiago, with bills to pay and a routine, was as suffocating as her secure life with Andre. And the truth hit her with the force of a terrible revelation. It wasn't about Tiago. It never was. And if it wasn't about Tiago, it also wasn't about leaving Andre. It was about the emptiness. She was using two brothers, two good men, as pawns in a dangerous game she had created to feel alive, to distract herself from the black hole she carried inside. And that's when she discovered she didn't love either of them. This epiphany broke her. Her story of forbidden love was, in fact, a story of sickness, of addiction. She looked at herself as if she were a stranger, and felt a deep self-loathing. That night, when she got home, she found Andre waiting for her with a warm dinner. He smiled, asked how her meeting had been, and talked about their plans for the weekend. And Camilla, looking at that decent man, felt like the vilest of creatures. She wasn't. A tragic heroine. She was an arsonist, burning the house down with her husband still inside, just to feel the heat of the flames. She came to the confessional not to ask for forgiveness for the adultery, but to ask for help, finding the brakes on the runaway train that was her own life. And listening to her, I realized the adultery was the feverish symptom. The infection was much deeper and older. My role was not to condemn the fever, but to help her find the source of the infection. First, we talked about emptiness and silence. The chaos Camilla created was a deafening noise to drown out an inner silence that terrified her. Gently, I asked her what she was running from. When was the first time she felt that way, as if there were an empty room inside of her? I spoke of the prophet Elijah's search for God. He looked for God in the great and powerful wind, in the earthquake, in the fire. But God was not in the noise, in the spectacle. God was in the still, small voice. I told her that she was looking for herself in the storm, in the earthquake of her encounters, in the fire of adrenaline. But perhaps her true essence, God's voice for her soul, could only be heard in the silence she feared so much. She needed the courage to be still and simply listen to what her emptiness had to say. Next, we delved into the difference between peace and tedium. She saw the peace Andre offered her as a cage, as a living death. I reminded her that peace of the spirit is not the absence of movement, but the quality of movement. Peace is like a deep river, which flows with immense strength, but in a serene and constant way. The chaos she sought was like a flood, noisy, destructive, and in the end, leads nowhere, only leaving a trail of mud behind. Her task was to relearn how to be the gardener of her own soul, to find the beauty in constancy, the adventure in deepening a real love instead of the superficial novelty of a risky passion. Finally, we spoke of honor and courage. She was dishonoring the sacrament of her marriage, Andre's love, her brother-in-law's trust. But above all, she was dishonoring herself by living a fragmented life. Courage, I told her, was not the audacity to continue her double life. That was just fear, disguised as boldness. True courage would be to jump off that tightrope, even without a safety net. The courage to face the truth about herself. The courage to choose a path that was, for the first time in a long time, entirely honest. Camilla left the confessional with a strange calm, the calm that precedes a great decision. And the outcome, her choice, was an act of brutal, silent courage. A week later, she came home. Andre was in the kitchen. He smiled when he saw her. She walked up to him, and with a steady voice that surprised even herself, she told him she'd had an affair with Tiago, and that it was all over as of today. She saw Andre's smile die, replaced by a mask of shock and pain. Before he could form a word, she continued, the words tumbling out as if rehearsed for a lifetime. She explained that the problem was never him, Tiago, and that the problem wasn't Andre either. The problem was her, that she was broken inside, and she couldn't keep breaking him along with her, that she needed to leave. Andre, crying, paralyzed, managed only to whisper the question, if she was going to Tiago. And Camilla, looking him in the eyes with a devastating honesty, gave the answer that defined the beginning of her redemption. She said no, that she was just going away, to a place where the only person she had to deal with was herself. That night, she left behind the perfect house, the good man, the secure life. Her act was not a search for a new love, but a radical escape from her own sickness. It was an act that was simultaneously selfish, selfless, and necessary. She chose solitude until she could heal. Her story leaves us with a difficult question. When we realize we are the source of poison in a relationship, what is the most courageous act? To stay and fight, risking continued harm to the one we love? Or to leave, causing an acute pain, but perhaps saving the other from a lifetime of suffering? What do you think? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if these stories, which challenge us to think about life's hardest choices, are important to you, subscribe to the channel. Each week, a new soul shares their journey here,